Well, good evening, everybody. It is about 25 past 11, so technically I should be going to bed. But before I've just come back from the gym, my new fitness regime, huzzah, I thought I would record another video, another sort of political, general sort of affairs video, about the monarchy, and about the British monarchy, specifically. We're coming up to the Queen's Diamond Jubilee, and obviously everyone in the UK is is beginning to get head up and get very excited. And obviously we also had the marriage of the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge last year. And what always unfortunately happens at these sort of times, as we approach these sort of events, is that people will start asking questions like, do we need the monarchy? What purpose does it serve? Etc. 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 And I just am of the opinion, and I'm sure that there will be some who totally agree with me, but I am of the opinion that I am not a citizen, I am a subject. I am a subject of Her Britannic Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, and I have absolutely no desire for that to ever change. And this question came up on BBC Question Time last week, and it was sort of debated amongst the panellists, and as you can probably imagine, the Guardianist on the panel was all sort of, I think we just need to grow up, etc, etc. Of course, because republicanism always works out so incredibly well, doesn't it? But the most apt statement, I think, actually came from the Conservative MP David Davis, who quoted the former Labour Prime Minister Harold Wilson, who said that one of the reasons that Britain will never ever become a dictatorship is because the most powerful man or woman in this land once a week must go before another and on bended knee explain to them how they're doing their job. Because, just if people aren't aware of it, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom has a weekly audience with Her Majesty the Queen where he or she tells the sovereign about the work, explains what's going on in the country, and it's a report. It's a report to the sovereign of what her Prime Minister is doing on her behalf for the British nation. Now, this is an extremely important constitutional role that the Queen is fulfilling here. She is the head of state, irrespective of how powerful the Prime Minister may believe him or herself to be. They have a fixed term. The sovereign does not have a fixed term. And the sovereign is our head of state. We don't refer to the armed forces of the British state. We refer to the Royal Air Force, Her Majesty's Navy. And ultimately the allegiance of our armed forces is not to the Prime Minister of the day, it is to the sovereign and the power of the sovereign as invested in Parliament or in the Prime Minister. But it all ultimately goes back to her. And I think for me the greatest argument for the British monarchy is the fact that constitutional monarchies do not become dictatorships. All this talk about democracy and representation and etc, etc, etc is all well and good. But if we look at the history of revolution and republic throughout Europe and throughout the world, republics generally lead to civil war and ultimately, in many cases, lead to oppression. Take the example of the French Revolution. We had the supposedly great French Republic. What did that lead to? It led to an empire. It led to Napoleon. So the idea that you implement republic and that somehow, everything just becomes the most perfect system, it's rubbish. And elected head of states, I just think are sorry about that. Elected head of states, I think, are just inherently dangerous. I think that they are, usually only out for themselves, usually only out for getting re-elected, and having a dangerously left or right-wing populist head of state can be a very, very bad thing. Look what's happened in countries where that's happened. You've ended up with terrible atrocities being committed. The existence of Her Majesty doesn't allow that to happen. And it's also a fundamental part of who we British are. I think it's one of the reasons why, people talk about class in Britain, but from my experience, if you go to countries where there is supposedly, egalitarianism, etc., such as France, such as the United States, they are far, far more aware of status and class than we are. Because ultimately, no one in the United Kingdom is as good as the Queen. No one is ever going to be on the same level as Her Majesty. So there's less kind of squabbling about class. Whereas if you're in a republic, it really is all about permission and position, I should say. And I've just found in most countries where you don't have constitutional monarchy, they're far more classist and far more divisive in terms of social strata than we are in the United Kingdom. People talk about the cost of the British monarchy, but the amount of money that we gain through tourism is extraordinary. If you look, and in terms of our foreign relations, I mean, bringing a prime minister or a head of state over and throwing a banquet for him or her in Buckingham Palace is a fantastic way to endear ourselves to them. It's a fantastic way to, put on a show, make them feel welcome. And, in many cases, this has been a fantastic way to improve trade in the UK. I also think the other point to make, of course, is that the British monarchy is not just our own. She is also, Her Majesty is also the Queen of Canada. She is the Queen of Australia. She is the Queen of New Zealand. This ties all of our nations together. And I do remember once on a visit to Canada asking a question of at that point, a fellow Canadian rugby player. And I asked him why it was that Canada, had kept the link to Britain and was still a constitutional monarchy rather than becoming a republic. And he said, it's very simple. Because it allows us to have something over in the United States. Because they really love the Queen, but she's ours. And, that made me laugh, and it's a bit of a giggle, but I think there is something in that, actually, that this idea of tying to mother country and tying to a network of countries and peoples, for example, within the Commonwealth, that just have a history and a relationship and a shared tradition that other countries don't have and would love to have. And, I was listening to, when we were hearing about when we were leading up to the Kate and Will's wedding, you had CBS, or was it CBC? I think CBC, running broadcasts on it and saying, of course, referring to the Canadian royal family and the Prince of Canada, and that is entirely correct. I'm British, obviously I'm naturally predisposed to refer to her as, Her Britannic Majesty, and, him as the Prince of, as a British Prince or Prince of Wales or whatever it might be. But they are also the Queen of Canada, the Prince of Canada, etc. And I think it's interesting how, royalist opinion is now beginning to grow in Canada as well. Last year they renamed their air forces again to the Royal Canadian Air Force and the Royal Canadian Navy, which I think is a jolly good thing, actually. So, yes, I am totally in favour of the British monarchy. The idea of republicanism in the UK is absolutely tiny. There is only one period in our entire history where we have not been either an absolute monarchy or a constitutional monarchy, and that was when we had Cromwell. And the Lord Protector was no good. Walked around as like he was a king. He wasn't a king. And, when he died, what happened? We had the restoration of the monarchy within a generation, and we've never looked back. So I don't think there is any merit whatsoever in Britain becoming a republic. We don't need a written constitution, because actually having your constitution in separate parts makes it much harder to amend. I mean, look what's going on in Hungary at the moment with all the constitutional amendments. Much harder to do that in the United Kingdom, where everything is effectively based on statute and on tradition. I think this is the way to go. And I think that any suggestion that, even suggestions that after Her Majesty has left us, that we would become a republic, I think are just utterly fanciful. So I'm very much looking forward to the Diamond Jubilee. I very much hope that we will be seeing members of nations of Canada, of Australia, of New Zealand coming over to the United Kingdom to celebrate Her Majesty's Jubilee as well. It'd be great to have all of the Commonwealth nations represented, and obviously, I'm sure there'll be lots of tourists who've come over to see it as well. And just to wish Her Majesty a very, very happy Jubilee, and to say that this particular Englishman is very much and will always be her loyal subject.